Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the Week 10 recap. This one coming to you from Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. In full transparency, this is take number 2. As I was watching back the last one, I said like a million fucking times just talking about Bush and I's matchup, and it drove me crazy, so I did not want to subject you all to that. So we are going to go ahead and try this again. So this week we had a lot of interesting matchups, a lot of big matchups that are going to be instrumental in deciding playoffs and as well, more importantly, deciding who's going to be doing the challenge. So I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it and talk about our first matchup of the week, talking about my miserable team losing yet again, falling to 3-7 on the season. At this point, pretty confident I'm not going to make the playoffs. However, I think I have enough points for that. I'm not going to be too worried about doing the challenge, but you never know. So hoping to string together a couple wins before the end of the season here. Rough week for the Scoregasms. Swift and Johnson gave pretty good performances, but outside of that, it wasn't great. Highlighted by the Browns defense, who got me -6 points. I'm kind of on that train due to getting rid of defenses at this point because losing a matchup because of your defense is pretty brutal. But Bush has got to feel good about getting the win this week, especially with Ja'Marr Chase and Joe Mixon on a bye. That's going to be big for him down the stretch in the playoff seedings, and Aaron Rodgers only scoring a little bit over 10 points. So big win for Bush here. Finally, Travis Kelce got it going for how we expected him to with that first round pick. Also got a garbage time touchdown from Elijah Moore that kind of saved him for the week. But at the end of the day, he got the win. Surprisingly, only a 2-point difference, less than 2-point difference, was not the closest matchup of the week, but we'll get to that later. Moving on to our next matchup, we got the top 2 teams in the league, Billy and Duder. Billy taking the loss here, and actually Billy on a 3-game skid, posing the question, is Billy bad? I would say no. I think his running backs of Eckler and Fournette, are going to keep him afloat for most of the season. His wide receivers can be a bit of a question mark at times, but I think overall, Billy's got a solid team. Do I think he's the best team in the league? No. But I do think he's obviously going to be a playoff team after starting 7-0, and he's playing me next week, so he'll be probably moving to 8-3. Duder, big win for him this week, showing why he's number 1 in the standings. Had a couple of not great performances from Bridgewater and Hines and even Cordero Patterson, but really was carried by his 2 stud receivers of Stefon Diggs and Cooper Kupp. Obviously, Cooper Kupp is awesome. Stefon Diggs, he hadn't had that big blowout game really that we'd expected from him, and finally had that this week. So hoping to get more of those from Diggs moving forward. And if he does, Duder's team's going to be tough to beat. Hawkinson got 0 this week and was still able to put up over 100 points. I think he's got a good chance of making a run this year. Moving on to our next matchup, we have the matchup of former and current Baker football team coaches. So got Josh here taking the loss with only 88.34 points. Tough week for him. I think he's got a better team than this, falling to 5-5, but no Kamara this week, no T. Higgins this week. Had to make some starts that he maybe normally wouldn't do. Maybe even more importantly, a really poor game for Russell Wilson his first game back. So I think Josh will figure it out, have some better weeks ahead of him. But this one was a little bit rough for him. On the other hand, Hayden finally getting some post-nut clarity, since week 2. Looking back on his scores, week 1 with 96.8, week 2 with 110.26, but every single week since then, he scored over 120 points. That's consistency we're really not seeing from anybody else across the league, certainly not from teams like myself. I think it's pretty obvious why that's happening. Jonathan Taylor is the number 1 running back in fantasy football. Josh Allen at QB3. Got Mike Evans and Michael Pittman, who are having really nice seasons for him as well. And Michael Carter was also a nice addition. So, I think Hayden's a dark horse to make a pretty deep run into the playoffs this year, just with how consistent his team has been since week 2. I think he's got a real chance of making a run. Next, we got 2 teams that are trending in 2 very different directions. Hard to blame Dare for having a rough last couple of weeks when you lose Derrick Henry, the number 1 player in fantasy. But it's been rough a little bit since then. His running back situation is not looking great. On the IR, he's got 4 pretty solid running backs. So hopefully get those guys back and do a little bit better, but it's really hard to overcome that Derrick Henry injury. Didn't have a great week from Lamar, who's been pretty solid this season. So hopefully he'll get back on track and needs Waller to get back on track as well. Hopefully string together a few wins and find his way into the playoffs. But I do think that injury is probably going to be too much for him to overcome and be one of the top teams like we thought he could have been. On the other hand, Kip's team has really been trending upwards as of late. Had a really slow start. Some people were even saying he was going to be competing for the challenge, but I think at this point he's got a chance to make the playoffs, especially with some guys he's been benefiting from other injuries. Obviously Darrell Williams has been good for him since Clyde has been out. Clyde hopefully comes back next week, so Darrell might lose some value. But then he's got AJ Dillon to take his spot, and as long as Aaron Jones is out, AJ Dillon is going to be a beast. So having him and Najee Harris is going to be really great for him. Obviously Tyreek playing like Tyreek. Hopefully he doesn't have to start Jamal Agnew too many weeks, but he had another good week for him. Kyle Pitts finally figuring it out. Jalen Hurts is about as consistent as they come at quarterback. So Kip was our top scorer this week and moves to 4-6. And if he can string together a couple more wins, he's got a good chance of making a run. I'm sure he's already starting to think about when he's going to make me wear the cone of shame, because it is looking more and more like that is going to be the situation. Moving on to the Let's Go Brandon Bowl, we got Coulter versus Travis. So this was our closest game of the week, and I'm assuming closest of the entire season. A 0.22 difference in favor of Coulter. Big win for him. We'll talk more about that here in a second, but maybe even a bigger loss for Travis. As he had mentioned in the group me, doesn't have a lot of points for, and so he really needs to string together some wins, because he's not going to be able to win many tiebreakers at this point with teams that are probably going to be making the playoffs. Obviously, the thing that stands out here is that 0.1 points from Le'Veon Bell could have started essentially any other running back in the NFL that played on Sunday and probably won this game. So that's tough. Deebo Samuel puts together another great game for him, obviously having a great season. A.J. Brown also, one of his newest additions, not having a great game. It's always tough when you lose by that little of a margin. You're always looking at who else you could have started. But hopefully Travis can get it back on track and string together a couple more wins and try to make a playoff push. Coulter, on the other hand, don't think he has much of a chance of making the playoffs, but this was a big win for him to separate himself from Gunnar and Heim. So I think this might be his biggest win of the season. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes having a huge week this week, finally looked great on Sunday Night Football. We're all happy about that. James Robinson continues to be a solid player. Devontae Smith, interestingly enough, the last 2 weeks has scored exactly 22.6 points. I'm sure Travis will dig up a way that there's a conspiracy theory behind that, but solid for Coulter, and he's been solid the past couple of weeks, looking really good. Moving on, got Carter versus Dillon, a pretty big matchup as far as playoff seeding goes here. Tough week for Carter. Had some people not perform to the level they normally do, like Darrell Henderson. And then Aaron Jones getting hurt is really going to hurt him. Hopefully he does only miss that 1 to 2 weeks that they're saying right now. If it's any longer than that, obviously Carter probably not competing for the challenge in any way, shape, or form, but he's only in 6th place right now, so it's not a guarantee that he's going to make the playoffs. Not having Aaron Jones could really hurt him. I think he does have a solid enough team overall, though, that he should be fine and should be in the playoff mix come the end of the season. Big game from Dak, which he continues to need, but just a tough week for him. I think his team will bounce back. Dillon, big win for him, moves him up to 3rd place overall at 7-3. That wide receiver combination of Jefferson, Lamb, and Metcalf is probably the best in the league and pretty tough to beat. So we're having those 3 plus Ezekiel Elliott. That's going to be a tough squad to beat down the stretch. Obviously Matthew Stafford's going to have better days than 9.82. So even though Dillon doesn't have the most points for of some of the teams in the playoff contention right now, I think he's got a good shot of having a good stretch down in playoff time with some of the players he's got on his squad, obviously assuming everyone stays healthy. Moving on to the game of the week, or what we wanted to be the game of the week, but ended up not being so great. Heim scored 64 points despite Christian McCaffrey scoring 26. Now, I can't give Heim too much of a hard time because he did beat me. So that kind of disqualifies me for talking shit on his fantasy football acumen. But our former 2-time defending champ is having a rough go of it, and this loss is not good for him, obviously. Hopefully he's been training because really it looks like Gunner's only going to need to win a couple more games to maybe just one more game to overtake Heim after this loss. And you don't see him get much better either. Obviously, David Montgomery being back is going to be big for him. But other than that, the team is looking pretty rough. Gunnar over here, like I said earlier, a huge win for him. Still in last place, but now only one game out. Just got to try to find a way to win one, maybe two more games for the rest of the season to get him out of doing the challenge. Tom Brady had his second worst game of the year, and really not a lot of standout performances on this team. The only one is his Cowboys getting 22 points. You're going to win a lot of games in fantasy football if your defense is scoring you 22 points. Gunnar, if you could have just given me 2 of those points to get me a win, I would have really appreciated it. But obviously, happy that you were able to beat Heim here, and we'll see. We'll see how this stretch goes. I think that's going to be the most entertaining part of the rest of this season is taking care of who's going to be doing the challenge at the end of the year. But that's all for this week. I know I still said a bunch of times this time around, but it's definitely less than the first time. Trust me. It was great seeing you all at the wedding, or a lot of you at the wedding a couple weeks ago. Ryan and I will be back the weekend before Christmas, so hopefully we can see you all and drink some beers with you before we head back to South Carolina. So love you all, and see you soon.